Information security is a battle of two sides. There is a defender and there is an attacker. Attacker poses threats and defender's goal is to defend against it. In this lesson, we're going to discuss some key defense goals and the threats against them. The oldest defensive goal is data confidentiality. Data confidentiality is about protecting data against unintentional, unlawful, or unauthorized access, disclosure, or theft. The threat against data confidentiality is data exposure. An attacker wants to read the content of the message. The scenario rose the idea of encrypted message and cryptography. A related but different goal is data integrity. Data integrity is the maintenance of and assurance of the accuracy and consistency of data over its entire lifetime. For instance, if I instruct my bank to transfer $1,000 to you, my goal is to ensure that if someone, maybe you, modifies the information, say to be a transfer of $100,000, my bank will notice the manipulation and refuse to do it. The threat here is data modification. One of the most important elements of confidentiality and integrity is that it helps to build and develop trust in the system. It potentially allows for the free flow of information. A service, in a form of software, network, or machine, should always be available to the legitimate user and should function properly. In this scenario, the defender's goal is system availability. The threat to this goal is called denial of service. On a successful DOS attack, access by authorized users are interrupted. It can cost an organization both time and money, while their resources and services are inaccessible. As we mentioned in previous goals, not all human users are the same. Some are allowed to know or do things and others are not. How can a computer know who is who? The goal of user authentication is to solve this challenge. For instance, I should be able to log in my Facebook account since I know my password, but you shouldn't. The threat here is called masquerading. You would like to convince the system that you are me. It is a common notion to have a secure password. Currently, the most commonly used password revealed in data breaches are 123456, which constitute to 23.5 million records. The last goal that we'll discuss is that of privilege separation or user authorization. A common scenario is that a legitimate user of the same system have different permission. For instance, students and teachers all uses the same computer system, but only the teacher should be allowed to update students' grade. The threat against this separation is that privilege escalation. A user may wish to access a user may wish to access a feature that he or she is restricted to. In case of the example earlier, a student may wish to view an exams or manipulate his or her grade. A prerequisite for deploying many of these threats we just talked about is the attacker's ability to run malicious codes on the defender's computer system. If the attackers can do this, he or she can mount many types of attacks. An attacker's ability to violate a defender goal, for an instance, an ability to run a code on someone else's computer, is called an exploit. But in order to develop an exploit, the attacker needs to find a vulnerability. Finding a vulnerability and developing them to an exploit requires a great deal of creativity and ingenuity, plus a broad knowledge of many fields. Vulnerability are what we're going to discuss next. Information security is all about mitigating the adverse effect of vulnerabilities. But what exactly is vulnerability? A vulnerability is a flaw in a system's design, implementation, or operation that can be exploited to violate the system security policy. Given this breakdown is very important, since many people think vulnerabilities are just flaws in the system code. This is true, but bad code is only perceived as implementation mistakes. Nevertheless, the system can have a problem in its design and usage as well. Let us consider a login system. We can define implementation mistake as a flaw in the system codes or programming mistake. In our secure login system that requires username and password, one of the issue is handling the use of quotations. The problem here is that most of the programming languages uses quotation to identify string. Username and password is a field of string. Mishandling a username and password with quotation may cause the system to crash. A flaw in a system's design are unconsidered usage that are left unchecked. Imagine our login system requires your email address and date of birth, like some old system did. The problem here is with the system's design, because even if it's perfectly implemented, your birth update is just not secret enough and can be scraped from places like Facebook. Even if the system is perfectly designed and perfectly implemented, it will be vulnerable. If our system requires your email address and a password that has 30 characters long and change every week, the problem here is the system operation. Because even if it's perfectly implemented and although it's secure in its design, it's completely impractical. Using a password so long and changing it so often will lead people to just write it on a note and stick it on their monitor. And yes, vulnerabilities are just bugs. As long as you agree that bugs can have a very broad meaning, not just in code level. As you can see, bugs and vulnerabilities come in all shapes and sizes.